Hello and welcome to Haverin About, a podcast hosted by myself, Bethany Miller-Euros, and my dad, Stuart Miller. And let me tell you what we have been dealing with in our household, because it involves your darling granddaughter.
That's darling star of stage now.
She's star of multiple stages. So she turned 5 last quarter, and she went to the dentist for her 5-year-old appointment. She's gone every year since she got teeth, and every year she asks, when am I going to lose my teeth, which is an ironic thing to ask a dentist, but it's very important when you're 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And finally this year the dentist said, this is it, like they're going to come out soon. And so she was very excited. She has a lovely dentist. Kids dentists are the best. You get like prizes. There's Bluey on the ceiling. You can watch Bluey episodes while you're having your teeth checked out. So anyway, so she came out and was like, the tooth fairy's going to come. The tooth fairy's going to come. And, you know, I am not only a very good salesperson, I'm also a very good mum. So very quickly I was like, so what are your expectations for the tooth fairy?
Yeah.
I was trying to think. I don't even remember what I got for the tooth fairy when I was a kid. Do you remember?
Pound. I think it was pound coins. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fine. It was enough to go and buy a thing of sweets.
Yeah.
So
certainly in those days.
In those days. And so I start asking her and she's like, well, Archie gets this and Charlotte gets this. And I asked my friend Elsa, and she said that the tooth fairy forgot one time, but then she got more money the next day. So I'm like, okay, she's done her market research. Great. She has some competitive benchmarking. She knows kind of what the going rate is. And I said, well, you know, what are you supposed to do? And she said, well, I leave the tooth under the pillow and then I get money in the morning. And I was like, okay, so you're expecting money. Yeah. And she said, yeah, one of my friends gets crayons, but I want money. And I was like, good. That's know your worth.
She is her mother's daughter. Yes.
And so I just loved it because we had this whole conversation and she hasn't lost one yet. It's I'm sure it'll come soon.
Yeah.
But she already knows kind of the benchmark to her peers. What are her peers earning? Yeah. She knows the payment expectation, you know, is this the next day? Because it's got to be the next day. Otherwise you're expecting more. So, okay, she knows what her net payment is. And, you know, and then she was talking about like the lore of the tooth fairy and the story behind it. Mm-hmm. And so she really understands that there's value to this. It's not just because apparently the tooth fairy doesn't want unhealthy teeth. They only want healthy teeth, which I wasn't aware of. I was like, oh, so you need to brush your teeth twice a day. And she was like, yes. So I was like, okay, so there's some negotiation in here. And so I just loved it because it ties in so nicely to the conversation that we had with Chris Goff all around comp plans and salary expectations and payment terms. Here's this little 5-year-old thinking about all of those things. Like, what does she need to do in order to get paid? How much is she expecting to get paid? What are her friends getting paid? And it just ties in so nicely to the conversation that we had with Chris.
So with that in mind, thank you for sharing that, Bethany. I'm glad she's in your house and not in my house because I'd be a sucker and I'm sure I would overcompensate. Which
look, we still haven't confirmed a number because I was like, well, you know, we'll see. But I do know I need to keep some cash
it's still
in the
gift
house pretty quickly.
CFO. Well, with that in mind, gentle listeners and viewers, please enjoy this conversation that we had with Chris Goff regarding sales compensation. Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. How are you?
Excellent. Well, Bethany and I are delighted to have you join us today. Thankfully, we both know you from a prior life, and so that makes this conversation a little bit easier to warm up. But we wanted to invite you on because I think that coming to this point in the year, and we're releasing this broadcast just before Thanksgiving, salespeople are either thinking about closing those fourth quarter deals and how are they going to close out their previous compensation plan, or they're starting to think, and a lot of leaders are starting to think about what's the compensation structures they want to have for the new fiscal year. And for many companies, that starts on January 1st. So they're starting that planning. And I know many of the sales compensation professionals in larger companies are already thinking about that and trying to link it to, companies' business plans. So this is, I hope this is quite timely. And we thought that we would bring you on so that we can have that conversation. Bethany, before we ask Chris to introduce himself, are there particular things that you're excited to be able to explore in our conversation today?
Yeah, well, Chris, thank you so much for joining. I'm glad that you did. I feel like salespeople, we have a love-hate relationship sometimes, especially when you're delivering the comp plan for the new year and everyone's like, what about this? What about that? What about these 7 other different scenarios that are very unique to me in my territory? Yeah. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully indicates that we weren't too annoying when we all work together. But no, I would love to just understand, as salespeople, we have a general understanding that the board or whoever owns the company sets a number that then gets trickled down into what is your particular quota for the year, and then how are you going to get paid out on that quota. So I know there's obviously a lot of work that goes into figuring out those numbers. So I'm looking forward to hearing just kind of the insider view of how do these things actually get decided, and how, I'm sure you've seen salespeople react in all sorts of different ways where it's like, why are they reacting like that? That was not the intended behavior, right, that we may be expected. So I'm just looking forward to hearing your insight. It's always good to know how other people in a company think. And I think it's very important as a salesperson or as a sales leader to really understand and lean on those experts in your organization. So I am here to learn and absorb.
So, Chris, let's start with just a little bit about your background in terms of your history, how you got into the compensation game, because, obviously we've known each other for quite a while. And so I know there's a good chunk of your history that has been involved in compensation. But, how did you get there? And, tell us a little bit about your experience along the way.
Yeah, so I thought that I was going to go into public policy. And so I got a master's degree in economics, and I went to go work for the state of North Carolina, and very quickly realized that is not a place that I wanted to stay for very long.
Yeah.
And I just happened upon this business analyst job at a very small company in healthcare IT once upon a time. And what that meant was I was doing reporting and a various sort of data analysis work for what was like going to become a sales operations group eventually. And like 3 months into the job, I didn't just have, the review of market data, the drawing of the territorial lines, the setting of the quota. I then picked up the comp plan work. And so I kind of like figured it out as I went along. I ended up setting quotas for that organization through many growth acquisition integrations for well over a decade. So I think it was actually ended up being about 12 years before I moved into broad-based compensation, where I learned the rest of comp. So like the rest of the story of the things, and I'd say more academic, more formal aspects to understanding compensation, but, was able to speak and live in a sales ops world. So because it just helped me understand enough of the business part that I think I'd say sometimes I'm able to speak both HR and sales, and that helps me kind of overcome a lot of the challenges, because some of the aspects sales comp is a very, very interesting area, because most every company has a part or piece that is done in different departments. And so generally speaking, you have this mixed bag of players that are involved with, whether that's a target setting, budget allocation, you have legal, you might have IT for data crediting, you'll have a commercial ops group potentially, or maybe even not even have one at all. but you'll have finance, and then you'll have HR, and then you'll have sales. And then it could be on and on and on, depending on the complexity of your organization, right? Like all kinds of different people doing everything, which means that there's lots of disparate decisions that go into that. So I've had the pleasure of sort of growing up and managing most all of it. And then also being involved with the certain parts and pieces and looking at how things can kind of like live in a bit of a symbiotic way where you don't have ownership. So a lot of what I was able to develop a little bit is being able to influence a bit more from the side. And I think really good sales comp professionals can do that because they realize that's what's kind of required to get what they believe to be good decisions, all the way through into the business. So that's a lot of
go ahead. It's kind of interesting because I just like a lot of areas of deep expertise do become distinct professions, and I think sales compensation as a subset of sales operations is one of those roles that in a lot of small to medium sized companies is somebody's left leg on a Friday afternoon, whereas as the companies tend to grow, have bigger sales force, maybe diverse sales force, then the need to manage that complexity increases. And I know you participate now in professional organizations that are basically for people whose sales compensation is their job. Tell us a little bit about that community, and when you tend to see them, sort of like appear in different sized organizations.
Excellent question. So if I talk a little bit about sort of like how I got more involved, I serve on a faculty position. I actually teach a variable pay class for an organization called World at Work that does certifications for total rewards broadly. So sales comp happens to be one of those areas, as well as broad-based compensation. And I kind of really got more heavily involved in that during COVID, as well as sort of building my personal brand and doing more like that content. In terms of when these jobs show up, it is a lot, like you said, in a sales ops world that even I would say nearly billion-dollar companies have minimal sales comp expertise associated with them, because you'll have someone who might be the person who's accountable for design, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing. They just know here's the comp plans we have, and we do a kind of check-in on an annual basis to see if we want to change anything or not. And then finance will set the targets based on whatever the business is telling them to do, not necessarily whether or not it's capable of being achieved or it's productively meaningful or anything like that. And you'll have generally a sales leader or a CRO type of role where that person may also only have expertise only to the point of the comp plan they had from their prior company. Not necessarily, is this good? Does this make sense here?
Yeah.
Is it culturally appropriate? And is it aligned strategically? Like none of those things necessarily come to light unless you go and intentionally review it on an annual basis. So, very large companies can have minimal to no, I would say, real attention to something that can have a significant impact to their organization.
Yeah, and I think for some of those larger companies, sorry, Bethany, I'll let you go in a second. Some of those larger companies, and what I've observed is they try to design a vanilla comp plan when they've actually got very varied product-oriented sales groups inside. And actually, the design of that comp plan may be great for a 7-figure target deal, but actually for a 5-figure target deal is completely inappropriate and doesn't actually align with the behavior that you're trying to get from the salespeople. So even within a single organization, I do think there's this kind of attempt to shoehorn everything into one comp plan when actually it ends up being neither fit for one or the other because it's a kind of bastardized thing to try and solve for both. Is that something you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. And then this is like a gradient of extremes where we have organizations who really only want to have like one comp plan and everybody gets it. Right. And then you have every single person has an individual comp plan. And Neither one of those are good things. And so finding these somewhere along the spectrum of this is ideal.
Yeah.
And what I sort of line up with is the job content. So it's a very HR answer here, but really, what are the underlying differentiations? These are daily responsibilities that are different from job to job. So if we have 15 jobs, ideally we don't have 15 comp plans, right? But probably you'd have different aspects of the coverage model that need to be positively reinforced in a very particular way, differently, because execution looks differently based on the way you have a portfolio of offerings. Even if you sold the same thing, as soon as you sell it in different segments, geographies, customers, you name it, right? Price points, subscription models, et cetera, you're probably going to have something that's a little different, even if it's as simple as inside sales needs to be paid differently than field sales. And then we have all these kind of cuts, if you will, that should be something that is incentivized differently. And it does go along with total target cash as well for the job, because not everyone should be paid the same way either.
100% agree. I've been at a company before where they were like, don't share your comp plans because they're all different. And then, you chat with your buddies and
Worst
they've
kept
chatted
secret.
with, everyone talks, everyone compares. And then you look and you're like, well, yeah, you're getting 7% for that. I'm getting 10%, but we do the same thing in the same territory. Okay. And then I've been on the flip where I've been paid the exact same amount if I'm selling to a huge 7-figure multi-year as the person selling new business tiny clinics. And the only thing that's different is, their OTE is this and my OTE is this. And I remember even as a young sales professional being like, that doesn't feel like it should happen. Like it's totally different selling strategies and efforts and styles. And so I feel very validated that you're saying that it should be different, but not so different that, it feels like they just threw some numbers out and said, well, we like this person. Let's give them 8%. We kind of think this person can sell more of that.
And I have seen that before where I worked with one organization that was so very focused on equality, because it really wasn't equity, it was equality amongst the sales population, that they gave everybody the same comp plan. So same base, same variable, same commission rate, to the point of it watering down everything because they had different jobs. So it doesn't really make any sense because they're different. It's the one thing about like pay is that it's very rare that you'll ever come across two people that are exactly the same. And so the very nature of that means that there's a need to reward for both their prior efforts as well as the expectations of the work that they're going to be doing. These are two things that we account for when we structure compensation to some capacity, which means we are allowing ourselves a reason for differentiation of pay. But there's got to be a reason for it, of course, right? It's just one of those things. An organization has to do its homework in order to justify differentiation of pay.
Yeah, it's interesting because, oftentimes I used to, when I was coaching salespeople that worked for me, one of my favorite phrases to all of them was, if you don't know what to do on a given day in your job, read your comp plan. Because basically that is your set of instructions from the company. It defines your territory, defines what you'll get paid on, and so on and so forth. So I think, I've always tried to argue that the compensation plan should basically be your set of marching orders as to what the company is asking you to do. Now, sometimes that becomes challenging because that clarity isn't there, or there are, conflicting information there. And I think
no doubt.
Experienced sales professionals over time develop this kind of sixth sense that when a comp plan is issued for a new fiscal period, that they read through it and they start the what I call the reading the chicken's entrails of the chicken, because the chicken is there, but they're like, okay, now I need to get into this a little bit and work out what is really to my advantage here, and sorting through to basically parse down what they think is actually very important. And I know just from being part of sales communities inside companies that oftentimes a lot of the discussion between the individual contributors was, all right, what does this really mean? I know that they're promoting this product, but that's got a lead time of this, which means I'm not going to be able to achieve this wonderful, bonus that they're going to associate with that because the sales cycle is too long. And so therefore this comp plan is not going to be meaningful to this brand new product that has come through, because even if I start selling it now, it's probably not going to land for 18 months. So therefore I can kind of ignore that piece that's there. And I think that's part of, what you're saying in terms of in the background. So I'm going to let Bethany approach this from the individual contributor perspective, looking at 2026 going forward. But for sales leaders who are the CRO and his team who might be sort of advocating for various adjustments to the compensation plan, as most sales leaders inevitably do, to try and either retain their people or, to support a particular product they think is important. What advice do you give to sales leaders as they're contemplating the new fiscal and how they can try and influence the design of the comp for the coming year?
Well, I tend to be an advocate of making sure that you're doing your homework to start off with, which in this case means if you have a particular opinion, let's validate that in some form or fashion before you take it to the next step, right? And so let's say a question of, I don't feel like my folks are as motivated as they could be. Great one, right? I think there's a lot of people that there's also a lot of people who will say something to the extent of I don't feel like, and we've lost a couple candidates. I'm not sure if we're competitive, right? Fair enough. So those are like two big ones that might come up probably, and they never stop, most likely. But there's a little bit of like, okay, let's dig in on this. Let's figure out what the root cause is. And now, ideally, you have some help in the organization. I don't know, maybe you don't. But you want to go and find out. So like from a competitive perspective, there are resources to go and investigate the total target cash compensation side of a sales incentive plan. And if you're in tech sales, you should have heard of something called RepView. .com as an example. Now it's just one data source, but it is something that exists that people know to go to if they're wanting a sort of point of comparison. There's also other, like other things that just by scrolling through LinkedIn or any of the job postings to kind of get an idea of the ranges of pay. Obviously, there are some problems with that, as we all know. But there's also very, very, one of the things I think that are underutilized is call some of your recruiter friends. Those people know what's going on at all damn times. And they'll be able to speak to kind of what it is that those, what is it that's going on. Now that's going to give you like a comp, like a maybe the skeleton, right? If you want the innards of that, you may want to look at something, like my book or like my blog posts. Because if you don't want to pay for my book, you can certainly go through and read the same thing in so many of the blog posts that really just point out a specific issue.
No, but
related
please
to
go buy Chris's book.
I mean, I'm biased. I think it's pretty good. I sell it on Amazon, but for all intents and purposes, there's a couple of big things that go along with this, which is like payment timing, assessing the appropriateness of a quota. How has your coverage model evolved with changes in strategy? So do we have a sort of internal conflict? And I think that's probably something we're going to talk a little bit more about in the next few minutes. But there's some of these things that you're needing to make sure you go and do, and so that you can then bring it up to those other decision makers, because every organization's different. Because it's always hard to know exactly who can move the organization. And sometimes it's finance, sometimes it's just the CEO and just says, this is what I want, period. Sometimes sales actually has a seat at the table. Sometimes it's HR, it all depends. But the idea there is that you show up with some of that homework being done so that it makes it a lot easier for you to kind of make an argument. So that's kind of one thing that I would say that all sales leaders need to make sure that they come equipped with that. Now,
There is an interesting thing about philosophy, though. I'll speak to two examples that happened to be back to back in my career. So I was with one organization that had a culture of that the entire sales organization was expected, based on the revenue targets that were set, to be able to achieve, on average, about 50% of on-target earnings. And obviously that was a variance across people who had just literally come in the door and were just starting in their territory, all the way through to people who were multi-year achievement award winners, et cetera, who were exceeding their quota. And I went from that where it was probably about a third of people hit quota and got some kind of attainment. And that, attainments like President's Clubs and foreign invitations to Golden Circle or whatever the branding is of your recognition awards inside some companies. Is an interesting badge of honor for a lot of individual contributors because they see that as a cap, an achievement cap for them, in addition to the cash going into the bank. And that was one culture where it was about a third of the sales force qualified to be able to get achievements of different levels. And I went to the next organization whereby for 2 years running, nobody made quota in the entire sales organization because their culture was they set targets and the expectation was, if somebody makes it, then that's going to be extraordinary. And I found it very jarring to go from one environment that had a very clear view as to trying to create an incentive culture and another one that just was, in my opinion, completely oblivious to that being maybe not the most motivating of environment if you're looking for people with tail hunter behavior.
Yeah. I think there's more than one way to approach the sort of design that comes across in these worlds. And so one is an achievable quota with a lower target incentive. And the other one is an unachievable quota with a unachievable target incentive. So you could have like a X quota and you could, on paper, make a ton of money. And you may end up with the exact same amount of on-target earnings delivered, right? So you could essentially have those same scenarios and be like, oh, I'm at 50% of quota and make the same amount of money for 120% over here. But the problem is there's a psychological sort of side effect that we have with that second one. Like you said, people learn to sort of cope with the perception of mediocrity in that scenario, in that environment. Then it's okay to achieve what the organization has established because we pay very well for underperformance. And so there's a clear side effect that you can't unlearn the longer that person's there. And so they'll have really significant challenges sort of moving on to the next place unless they have the remnants of the first one, if you will, large enough to kind of like overshadow this doesn't seem right, as you said. It doesn't feel right because it's a bad play if you really want to behaviorally reinforce the desired thing that you have a performance management mechanic of some capacities says this is what we're willing to pay associated with this level of performance. And if no one ever achieves it, by the way, the median of quota attainment is, and it has been like this for like 20 some odd years, is approximately 50% of people. So when you ever have a scenario where you're not getting in that 50-60% of your people achieving quota, then you are off from what everybody else is doing. And it's okay to be different, but I don't think that's the brightest approach to accomplish it.
Bethany says, if you don't subscribe, I'm not allowed to make any more dad jokes.
Which honestly might be a selling point, but still, subscribe anyway, please. I once interviewed for a company that had like 15 salespeople. And, I got to the stage where it was like, okay, tell me about the comp and, how many percent. The normal interview question for salespeople, what percentage of your people made quota last year? And they said, 100%. I said, the whole sales team made their number? And they said, yeah, and we have for 6 years straight. Wow. And I went, oh, okay. And so I was like, well, could you send me the comp plan? And they said, we actually just hired a new CRO and he's rewriting the comp plan right now. And I was like, none of you are going to make quota next year. And I was like, oh, I bet you that 100% will change. And they're like, well, why? Why would it change?
Right.
And I'm
Right.
like, because it's not good in a roundabout. Because the other thing as well, in that particular company, once you hit your 100%, you didn't get paid anything more.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, no.
Oh, interesting. So
Thank
you're
you very
capped
much.
at 100%.
And I was like, so what do your reps do for the last like 2-3 months of the year? And they were like, oh, they're still working. I was like, no,
they're not.
working. They're not working.
Well,
But I mean, in a roundabout way, what a great
pipeline
ride
for
those
January 1.
Yeah, exactly. They're sliding. All of those deals are going over there. Bethany, I know you've got experience of this, and Chris, we've seen this over the years. Is the impact of ramps and staircases when it comes to compensation? And I'll let Bethany. You can talk about any experiences you've had with that in your compensation experience, and then Chris, talk a little bit about the rationale and incentive and effect of using those mechanisms. I think everybody is kind of used to the idea of if you exceed, well, I've seen it work both ways with exceeding quota, is either it ratchets down in terms of, what happens because they actually don't want you to sell much more. And then I've also worked in places whereby it actually has multipliers. It increases. It gets faster because if you're doing well, they want you to keep doing well all the way through the end of the year. So I think that's the odd thing about sales compensation design is it's as much philosophical as it is economics. But Bethany, what's your experience with ramps and stairs, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I think a ramp is, in my opinion, and you can disagree with me as the sales comp guy, a ramp is only as good as your sales onboarding. If your sales onboarding is effective and you have good sales enablement teams who are going to train you up and get you going, great. If you are told, as I have in the past, well, here's our deck and here's the product, go sell it, that ramp can be very, very non-useful depending on what the organization is like. So they're useful, they're nice, but I'm not blown away by them unless the company itself is very well organized.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about a ramp, are we really talking about a proration of quota? Is that just to be in sync on the language? Is that what we're thinking?
I think I've seen multiple designs of ramps and steps used. I've seen them whereby, basically it was literally a different percentage for Q1, Q2, Q4, i.e.
Got it.
They bias towards paying out more on Q4 deals. Well, guess what that does? It incentivizes people to sledge their deals into Q4 because they're going to get paid more on them. I've seen it whereby it's like until you achieve 25%, you're only getting paid A. But as soon as you achieve 25%, you get paid A.5 between 26 and 50, and all kinds of complicated things that basically mean that your compensation is skewed towards quota. And I think the most egregious I saw of it was that if you sold 80%, you actually only got 50% of your OTE because of this ridiculous ramp that was there, because that was so biased towards a proportion of the compensation being in that 80 to 100%. And oftentimes that is done because the company has an experience, or whoever is running the compensation design has an experience of lots of people getting close to their OTE and going, that's good enough, in terms of for their lifestyle and what we're looking for. And maybe they're not as motivated by, spending a week in Hawaii or whatever the attainment, sort of like, boost is. And so that's what I mean by a ramp. And it can be designed in different ways, as I described.
So I'll use slightly different terminology and to kind of try to explain in a couple different ways, because I think of ramp in a more of, let's say, a new hire scenario as a default, where I'm kind of thinking of because I'll say this, it's like everything that you described is kind of modifications to a pay curve. And so there's this XY axis between pay and performance. And so along that pay curve, you may essentially withhold pay entirely, like a true threshold, where it's like, well, you don't get paid anything until you get to X%, right? Because you're working for the company until we make enough to pay for your salary, type of thing, right? And that does make a lot of sense in certain organizations, not usually in tech, candidly. It's not as a common thing. But there's also the modifications to the pay curve that involved withholding of some capacity or step ups. It's just like the concept of a cap, right? Ideally, best practice in sales comp is not to have a cap, but there are certain scenarios where it may make sense. It depends on what you sell. So like if you have a true capacity issue, like manufacturing, where you genuinely cannot sell, like the company cannot deliver more than a certain amount, then there are certain times where you need them to stop selling for periods of time or sell less. So there's a declining marginal productivity aspect that goes with a declining rate over a certain amount as well, right? We can see that those, depending on the business you're in, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But the usage of a ramp for new hire, as an example, is meaningful only, and Bethany, I think you said it correctly, it's meaningful only in the way that the company can actually support the intent. And so if it's like, we need you to learn how to sell things our way, and so what we're going to do is put you to school for a couple weeks. Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to prorate your quota, and we might even prorate your variable side as well. And then if you overachieve, if you do it right, if you overachieve, then you actually get this sort of like golden handcuffs type of thing, because you have a really good experience on your first year of comp because we prorated all of things. If you're successful, then win, right? That's how I like to see those sorts of things play out. It doesn't always work that way, mind you, but that makes a lot of sense. Stuart, to the sort of rest of what you were also talking about is it's like there are certain sales functions that are so separated from the reality of the act of selling that, and I mean this from let's say a procuring cause of influencing others to purchase, right? And actually having a contract. So like med device type of areas, pharma, where you really can't even pay people for the thing that you need them to do because technically that's illegal. And we have those sorts of scenarios where it gets a little bit more complicated to figure in these proxies for like, well, how are we going to pay these people when we essentially need them to do educational marketing, right? And so they're selling, but not really selling, but they're a sales force. And so you do have some of those challenges where you have to construct mechanics that are more of like, run rate revenue. And so you have these threshold scenarios where it's super complicated. And I'll be honest, they don't really work. It's just what people expect.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just how sales comp evolves, we picked something once upon a time and we're still living with it 20 years later.
And you also get the whole new CRO. Well, this worked for me before, so we're going to redesign around this.
Oh, absolutely.
There's lots of what I call inherited grief that happens when you get married to a new sales leader. But I've seen it happen with the new CFO as well. New CFO comes in and everybody in sales always is paranoid about finance because they always think they're trying to take money out of their pocket. Yeah. And sometimes they are.
Yeah, but it's entirely justified many times.
And so from that perspective, I know we both experienced CFOs in our time that, we're not even shy about sharing their opinion about that in terms of, the way that sales were compensated.
Oh, absolutely.
Let me ask you, let me pivot that a little bit to another topic that is often comes up. And sometimes it's announced in the fiscal plan, but oftentimes it's introduced mid-year or partway through the year when the company suddenly decides either, we missed something that we really wanted to focus on. They get a new set of marching orders because maybe a revenue trajectory isn't going well in the first or second quarter or whatever it be. And that's the horrible tackling thing that I've always struggled a little bit with psychologically, except when you happen to fall into the positive side of it.
Yeah, until you get the big cash payout. And you're like, I love them. These are great.
Sales performance incentive schemes, or otherwise known as SPIFs.
Yeah.
SPIFs, I've got a love-hate relationship because, as I say, I've benefited from them, whereby, I've received some quite nice checks. Normally it was for a deal that I already had lined up and was closing anyway. So I always feel a bit ambivalent about SPIFs, but I do know that they cause quite a bit of discontent among salespeople because they start the year, they think they know what the plan is, and then suddenly there's a curveball introduced. And if it's minor, then that's not too much. That's not too bad, and you just slap the back of the person who is successful being able to get paid on it and go, you lucky dog, and on you go. But when it's suddenly something very significant and you see somebody getting paid for something that they were probably going to bring in anyway, I think it creates a lot of discontent around. So that's my ambivalence. You give me your experience of how those kind of mid-year curveballs affect the sales compensation professional.
Yeah. So as it relates to SPIF, you're exactly right. People either tend to love them or hate them. And they're very, very few in between. I tend to be okay with them if you have a good program to start off with. And that's kind of like a big question mark. So like if you essentially just have these contests and you layer them on top of this pile of chicken entrails, then you have a problem, because all you're doing is just throwing money at things and hoping that something works. And I've seen that before. Not a big fan, because again, you just come across like you don't know what the hell you're doing. And now if you have a pretty good program and it's sort of in sync and congruent, and we have like a launch of a new product, we have something that was outside of the realm of understanding, some sort of significant market shift. There was an announcement, there's a merger and acquisition, something like that, or there's a clear go get. Like your competitor's doing this. Okay, we got to pivot quick. Those sorts of things are good reasons, because how we make sure a SPIF makes sense is that it is temporary. It is not a thing where we train our customers to expect it every quarter, at the end of every quarter. Kind of like they know that it's coming, which means they're expecting a discount from us because they know there's going to be a SPIF associated with having them sign it on the last day, at the last minute of every quarter, right? Like we train people to respond in the way that they ideally want to be treated, whether we're conscious of it or not. This can be a bit of a problem if you overuse it. It also, for a good SPIF to be good, it also needs to be like a reasonable percentage of the total comp. So it's kind of like if it's small enough but meaningful enough, right? Mm-hmm. This is a little bit of like Goldilocks here. We have to like find it out, but that's also why SPIFs only work for certain groups in certain ways. Like enterprise field sales should not get the same amount as a lead gen person for their contribution to maybe even what ultimately becomes the same transaction. They should have it. It should be sized locally to their relative total comp package, as well as one of the reasons like a SPIF can work is it's got to be within your sphere of control.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, when I feel like some things have worked from a SPIF perspective, I have done it more of I've leaned more towards this the last few years. Is more like a hunting license.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's identify very specific things that need to be accomplished and put money associated with the accomplishment of those, rather than kind of like grandiose. If the company gets to this, where everybody's going to get this, I'd rather it be give me the deals that we need in order to make the things happen. And we have a one-on-one conversation with those people about what is it that needs to be accomplished, and then see if we can even get them to move, right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, one of the things, depending on what you're selling and who you're selling to, it doesn't matter if you throw all the money in the world to something, doesn't mean it's going to move. So
exactly.
Why get ourselves all twisted in with this idea that everything is coin operated when in fact it isn't?
And that's so true. I worked for a company where every Q4, there would be a SPIF saying everything that's closed in the last 30 days, you get an extra X%. And my first year I got burned on it because I made my quota in Q3. I was like, oh, hey, I pulled all my stuff in. I'm good. I'm sitting pretty.
And then you learn the right way of selling.
Well, exactly. And then everyone sandbags. But guess what? They then did that in 1 year, and a lot of the big sandbagged deals for December didn't come in. And we as a company did not hit our target. And it's like, well,
Whoops.
these deals might have closed in October, September, earlier in the year if you hadn't trained your salespeople to sandbag crap. Now, I still sell my stuff because I am one of those, I like my 100%. I like psychologically.
You want that guaranteed in your mind, right?
I want to know that I have the money committed. So as soon as I can get it signed, I get it signed. But there's a lot of salespeople who don't act that way.
Yeah.
And I think when you know there's going to be a Q4, fire sale spiff, I don't think that's encouraging good behavior. And that's what a comp plan is supposed to do. It's supposed to drive the best behavior. So if you're just going to blow it up at the end of the year, now, unless you're desperate, right? If you're desperate and you just need money, throw money at your salespeople.
In America, we say like and subscribe.
In Scotland, we say, don't be a numpty, just press the button.
Well, and I think there are a lot of companies that do have that. Some almost reek of desperation because they don't know what they're doing. They haven't solidified their strategy. And so they select the thing that they think might be the most accessible for everyone instead of doing enough of the work behind the scenes. One of the things that I cover and I would say, and I think I reiterate in many of my books, is that you, as an organization, you need to go and spend the time to know what you can actually afford to do before you go and hire people to do it. Yeah. So this is a ready, aim, shoot rather than the reverse. And a lot of organizations kind of do the shoot, ready, aim and hire a salesperson. Then we're like, okay, we don't know what you're going to sell, but we knew we needed to hire good talent. And then both fail miserably because, the salesperson doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know how they're going to be successful. And it's not like the product's ready or the marketing's ready or any of that sort of stuff because no one knows anything. They were just told they need a salesperson.
So there are so many, there's always been startups. There's always been small companies emerging in health tech. But I think especially in the last 2-3 years, there's a new AI company that I see hiring on LinkedIn like every other day. And a lot of them, it's sub 50 people. Maybe the founder has been the one selling so far, or they've had one sales guy who's like a buddy from that founder's old world. And they move forward and they get to a point where they go, okay, we need to build a sales team and we need to build a comp plan to support them.
Right.
Obviously, I know you've done a lot of work directly for some of the bigger companies where there are a lot more complex sales organizations. But what is maybe your advice to some of those smaller companies where they're just starting to hire people? There's a lot of outsourced and partnerships.
Right.
How do you recommend they approach trying to figure out a good, solid comp plan so that, as you say, both sides succeed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the one, that acronym of the keep it simple, stupid is always a great place to start, right? What I see most common is that the smaller the organization where there's less clarity on the performance side in terms of an understanding of the magnitude of performance or what's a good quota look like because they don't have enough history, is to establish more of a commission rate plan where they understand what it is that they can afford from an ongoing cost of sale perspective, right? And then as you learn more things, then you can start coaching and developing more of a plan of understanding and ultimately shift to maybe more of that bonus style where there's differing levels of payout. So I think the simplest one usually is figuring out a commission rate that is acceptable for you to be able to afford. And then what you have to do is also do enough of the math to figure out your personal cash flow of the revenue associated with those contracts so that you can establish enough of a sustainable organization to kind of, the thing is, what you don't want to do is have somebody wildly successful selling things and then not have the cash to pay them. So in the getting it going phase, I personally think it's better to be very blunt and honest with what effectively will be like a partner inside of your organization. I kind of think you treat your sales people, especially those early years, as more of a partner and be very frank with them about the situation of the organization. This is what we need in order to keep our doors open, right? I need you to sell more than that in order for us to make a profit, because all of that money, nobody's getting paid really anything in those early days. All this money needs to go into the development of the product for the next year and the year after that. And in that world, there's genuinely a true cash flow issue. And so figuring out how, like the organization can be comfortable enough to be able to pay that person while at the same time making sure that they don't get themselves into a situation where they go belly up. And in some cases, that means delaying the comp to be able to account for that. But I do think this all involves a point of transparency, right?
It's interesting because, I think that your approach is the right one for that smaller company hiring their first one or two salespeople, i.e. sales professionals, as opposed to the founder going and being the pitch man, is just going with a straightforward 2% of first year sales, 5%, 8%, whatever the number is that makes sense from a cost of sale perspective to be able to offset against that. The thing that I see that often happens, though, is that they reach that mid-size where they're going to scale up now to having, 10 to a dozen salespeople. So therefore, we need a sales leader, we need a CRO, and they hire somebody and they immediately, that person comes in normally from a much larger organization and drops their sales compensation structure in, which is designed for several hundred, maybe thousands of sales in the organization. And they just go, we're going to have this complexity, and go, boom, drop the mic. And I think that kills a lot of those kind of entrepreneurial organizations for a couple of reasons. One, it's so complicated that people can't get their head around what the heck am I actually trying to sell, and how can I be successful here? And then secondly, it becomes impossible to administer because there are so many variables involved in the design of it that it becomes a weekly 8-hour analysis exercise. And then lots and lots of contention and disagreement about, well, was that threshold met? Did they cross this trigger? And it just becomes very, very difficult to administer. But let me pivot so that we can bring things to a close. Obviously,
there's so many things I'd want to comment on that.
Well, maybe we'll record that on a follow up with you in terms of sort of like over design, and then how the heck do you administer plans eventually. But where I wanted to take things to bring us towards the close was 2026 is coming. Can you think of advice that you would give executive leaders that in terms of trends that you see occurring now from either your own direct experience or the networks you're part of? What is the new hotness? What are the trends that are starting to happen in and around sales compensation? And then for individual contributors, from Bethany's perspective, thinking about what should I expect to see with that, and basically how do you respond and react if you're an individual contributor and suddenly there's a radical redesign of what you've been used to based on those emerging trends?
So I think if I think about what's going on in the world, I think that there's a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, at least on the tech side, there's an ongoing movement from, and I think for many of us that lived through this, that initial license fee to the subscription model type of thing, and now subscription model to consumption based being that sort of next phase. And so there's lots and lots of talk of that, as well as AI, of course. But AI has still got a long way, I think, my opinion, before it gets to really be the thing that necessitates.
Oh no, we're going to get rid of all salespeople. It's like bots are going to be answering the phone to everybody. That's the answer. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And so I think the consumption model is a little bit of a shift for tech in the way that it's almost, this is the part where I say it's almost a lot like actual revenue for so many companies that have always lived that way. And so they ask the question, well, what's the difference between the way we've always paid, right? But it's the nature of having to reassess the points of engagement between the different sales functions because of the nature of consumption, right? You still need a lot of that new business, client sales, customer success handoff part that requires really reassessing the who does what and how to improve the channel conflicts that may arise in your coverage model. That is what I'd say is the bigger part. And this is how I look at things. It's got to be it's got to be strategy first, org, then comp. Comp is the last, right? So don't try to say, I want to pay these people this way without us knowing the jobs and the who does what. And is this sort of like aligned and positively reinforcing our strategy. And so some of that is making sure that we can't sort of, ride two horses with one ass here on the way of pursuing, well, we're going to do a little bit of this, going to do a little bit of that, do a little bit of this, and then expect we're going to execute effectively.
Mhm.
Not going to happen, right? So there is that. And I would say that's the thing for the executives is pick your strategy so that it can be executed upon, right? Because people can then really follow through on it more effectively. So if you're kind of like a little bit in now, well, then you're probably not going to get there, right? If that's it. And then the thing that we see in sales comp is so many things change, but so many of them stay the same, which would be go and look at your comp plan every year. Really like take the time to assess it. And if you don't know what you're doing, then ask around. Because I'm the sales comp guy. You now know a guy. You can reach out to me. There's always that. But that's part of really the need is every year you should at least go and ask people about this, how, like just shed some light on it. Because part of the problem, Stuart, and you said was that CRO coming in, they pulled the comp plan from their prior organization. Doesn't mean it's any good. It just means that's what they're accustomed to.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. I've been lucky enough to mentor a lot of young sales professionals, and some of them will be so, especially if they rose through the ranks, right? If they were an intern, if they were a BDR, if they were in inside sales, and now they're kind of at the big table, and they've got some big accounts where they can sell some big things. If you're still stuck on, but I want to have this many calls a month, it's like, you're not getting paid for that. Stop it. Like, it doesn't matter. You need to look at what your comp plan is. Now, if you need to do 50 calls to get to your comp plan, sure, that's fine. That makes sense.
Right.
But if you're not being paid for it, and this is where I love the human psychology and behavior side of comp plans. Because I love, like, if you're an account manager and your comp plan is just pure, dollar renewal in, okay, fine. I love when a comp plan has that you have to do QBRs, you have to document them, and you have to have this, and you have to have relationship. I love when you're explicitly telling the people, look, yes, you need to get this many dollars in, but this is what you need to do in order to achieve it. I enjoy a comp plan like that because I think it's easier to achieve. You're like, I can do QBRs left all day, easy. But it's behavior. You have to look at the behavior, and if you don't understand it, go to your trusted peers. Go to the people that made their number last year and be like, hey, could we just get on a Teams meeting and you talk me through how you're understanding this? Talk to your manager, talk to another manager. It really is, your CRO is not going to sit on that call when they announce the comp plans and be like, this is what we need you to do and what we want you to do and what we're really saying here. No, they're going to just read through line by line and, they're going to remove some of the detail and the narrative behind it.
I think it is an important thing for people to figure out the path that translates into their greatest level of success. And there's more than one path to be able to do that, right? I mean, if I'll use baseball, there are home run hitters, and then there are singles and doubles hitters. There's people that steal bases and on and on and on, right? And your combination of how you make money can be limitless, but sometimes it is as simple as you got to do these things, and that probably is something that many folks who might ultimately be B and C players don't ask enough of the questions of the people that are making the big money on a regular basis. Tell me how you do this every year. Tell me what you're doing so that I can go and, participate in the secret sauce, as it were. And that's because ultimately, coming from a sales compensation professional, I would prefer more people make lots of money, because I set up a comp plan where if you're successful, the company's successful. We actually don't want you to underperform. I want more people to overperform. And I think that there may be, maybe finance doesn't always agree with that. But I think the folks that's sitting long enough in that game realize that if they do it right, they're setting up so that everybody can participate in the point of success, and it not be like a detriment to the organization. Both things can be happen, and it's a good thing if it does.
I think that it's kind of interesting because this is where the sales leader's role becomes very important in terms of matching the personalities and competencies of the individual characters they have and which roles they're playing and what triggers them. Because, like Bethany described, there are some people who do like a grind. They don't like going whale hunting. They don't like, I've got 2 chances to make my quota all year.
Right.
And
And
there
not
are
everyone
others.
has to be a whale hunter.
Yeah. There are others who that's what they live for. They get a visceral high from the anxiety of navigating those deals to maturity with lots of risk normally associated with them. And then the exquisite high of closing those deals. And, and then, a single deal blowing them to 180, 200% a quota and so on and so forth. And those are very different personalities. And I think as a sales leader, finding those characters and matching them appropriately against the function that you're wanting them to perform and the territory and the product mix and so on and so forth is another part of the dark art of sales compensation. Because typically, I always used to say to people, the comp plan is what the comp plan is. Read it, understand it, because it's your instruction manual. But also, you're not negotiating it. It's not like you have a lot of opportunity to influence it because it's been designed for the company's purpose. And you're just trying to sort of interpret it to say, okay, so now from a selfish perspective, how can I get the most out of this?
So I think what comes to mind for me when you were just saying that is I think we almost need to come up with a sales pamphlet, like a sales coaching pamphlet that says, take all of your folks to a casino and what kind of games do they line themselves up with?
Yeah, that's a
and
great
probably will tell you a lot of things as to their scale of risk aversion and or drive for the high associated with the craps table versus the one-armed bandit type of
and if they're single number bettors on a roulette wheel, then maybe return them to the community.
There's a balanced strategy associated with that.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say, though, I did enjoy one time. I was at a sales kickoff and, they did the big presentation of the new comp plan and the leaders are up there. And we had this guy that had just graduated 6 months ago from business school or whatever. He was very, very young. He had gotten very drunk the night before. And they announced it. And we're all, salespeople, we always grumble, right? Oh, it should have been this.
Yeah, it's never good enough.
So we were all grumbling. He was so inspired. He was like, we need to revolt. We need to go up there. We need to give them a piece of our mind so they change it. And if we all get together, and we were all like, no, we're not actually going to.
Yeah,
we're not actually going to do any of this or tell anybody any of this.
Yes,
we just like bitching. We just like complaining.
Yes. Right. Harumph. And no, but we're not going to actually do anything now.
Yeah. But the dude was ready to storm the C-suite. And we were all like, no.
Blood of angry men.
Okay.
Sticking with your musical theater sort of introduction, Bethany. Well, Chris, I feel like we could talk for at least another hour on these topics, and maybe
Easily.
we will. Maybe we'll find an opportunity to have you back and
everyone can submit the stupidest comp plan they've ever had to work against.
Yeah, that would
or
be
you've
great.
Been told to create.
Yeah, in the comments, please, if anybody has got the my God type examples of compensation plans that they have had to sort of suffer through. Or if you want some advice from Chris, obviously we're going to put his details up, and you can also pose some questions in the comments here as well, or email Haverin about, and we'll be delighted to pass those on to Chris. But for now, Chris, I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to come and share your wisdom with us. And, it's been terrific.
Well, I hope you all really enjoyed listening to that conversation with Chris Goff. He is such a intelligent resource for all things sales comp and salary. It was interesting to learn some of the inner workings. I've got to remind myself not to play that podcast in the car when PJ is listening, because she is going to She will negotiate a hard bargain.
She'll absorb all the lessons.
She'll be like, so my understanding is that it should be $10 for my first tooth. I'm like, whoa. Let's negotiate down.
Exactly. And if you need help, then please, we've got Chris's details. And remember, it's the Sales Comp Guy. And you can find him on LinkedIn. He's got his own website, and we'll put those links in the description. But, Chris is very open to helping anybody understand more about the structure of sales compensation, whether you are a company leader trying to sort of work out how do you try and best incentivize your sales teams, or you're an individual contributor trying to work out how you decipher some of the complexities that exist in the sales compensation plan. But for now, until our next episode, keep Haverin.
Bye.